People often ask if you had to pick just one thing, what would be the secret to a happy life? A happy wife? Ha! Well, sort of. The answer is clear. The secret to a happy life is strong connection with other people. If I had to pick one thing, that's it. The wisdom of the ages and current scientific studies agree on this point. People are naturally social beings, and those who have a strong support group are more likely to be happy and physically healthy. It has been estimated that approximately 60 million people in the United States, or 20% of the total population, feel lonely. Some surveys say up to 40%. A study found that 12% of Americans have no one with whom to spend free time or to discuss important matters. More than 1 in 10 people have no one. Loneliness is breaking our hearts, but as a culture, we rarely talk about it. And it's not just an emotional illness, it is physically killing us. People without adequate social interaction are twice as likely to die prematurely. The increased mortality risk is comparable to that from smoking, and loneliness is twice as dangerous as obesity. It seems all our internet interactions aren't helping, and in fact, at times, could be making things worse. A recent study of Facebook users shows that the amount of time you spend on social networks could be related to how lonely you feel throughout the day. In a society that judges you based on how expansive your social networks appear, loneliness is difficult to fess up to. It feels shameful. We think, if I were a better person, I wouldn't be lonely. Admitting you're lonely is like wearing a big L up on your chest. Maybe it's the scarlet letter of the 21st century. So God, why loneliness? So I have 3 big questions about loneliness. Question 1, why do I feel so lonely in a crowd? Loneliness appears to have intensified in every society in the world as modernization occurs. The number of Facebook friends and fans and likes and comments we have, the size of our church, how perfect our family looks, how great our career is going, and even our popularity have nothing to do with how healthy our relationships are. Some of the most popular and successful Christian leaders, bloggers, social networkers, and Bible teachers are the most lonely human beings I have ever known. And it's not only Christian celebrities. Stephen Fry, a beloved British actor, has starred in blockbusters such as The Hobbit, V for Vendetta, and Sherlock Holmes. After a suicide attempt last year, he wrote a blog post about his fight with depression. He cited loneliness as the worst part of his affliction. He writes, "Lonely? I get invitation cards through the mail almost every day inviting me to be at the Royal Box at Wimbledon, and I have offers from friends who ask me to join them in some of the most beautiful and desirable places in the world. Well, what right do I have to be lonely?" But he goes on to say, in the end, loneliness is the most terrible and contradictory of my problems. Most of us know what it's like to be lonely in a room full of people, which is the same reason even a celebrity can be deeply lonely. You can be surrounded by hundreds of adoring fans, or hundreds of fellow church members, or hundreds of people in a mall, even by a loving family. But if there's no one you can truly rely on, if there's no one who really knows you, who understands you, you will feel isolated, alone. Robin Williams said in World's Greatest Dad, "I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people that make you feel all alone." Loneliness sets us apart by making us more fragile, negative, and self-critical. The good thing is, in order to be socially satisfied, we don't really need that many people. The key is in the quality, not the quantity, of those we really know. We all need several people on whom we can depend, and who depend on us in return. As a culture, we obsess over strategies to prevent obesity. We provide resources to help people quit smoking. We preach about the importance of church attendance. But I have never had anyone ask me how many meaningful relationships I have, ever. We're afraid to ask a question like that because we're terrified that they may think we want, God forbid, a meaningful relationship with them. And even if we did ask, it's not like there's an easy solution for helping someone deal with loneliness. It gets complicated, and we don't have time for complicated. Stephen King once said that alone was the most terrible word in the English language. I used the word horrifying to my therapist a few years ago to describe how I felt about being alone, and he furiously started scribbling in that notepad of his. But could it be that beyond the terror of loneliness, beyond the deafening crowds, lies the riches of one's personal journey? Psychologists say the best cure for loneliness may not be seeking the company of others, but rather just the opposite. They say we must focus inward and address the negative thoughts that underlie loneliness in the first place. We must confront and embrace our loneliness. When we are lonely, we tend to be cynical, self-conscious, and untrusting. Loneliness makes us so anxious and worried about rejection that it distorts our thinking and our behavior. Most of us tend to have an abnormal perception of ourselves and what people think about us. Lonely people not only communicate negativity to others, but also elicit it from others and through others. It is a vicious cycle. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, recommend that everyone try at least 6 different groups to find one that suits you best. 6 different groups. I wonder how many of us have been that persistent. If we feel at ease with a group, we tend to just give up. But if we are persistent and we challenge the assumptions and feelings that tell us to give up, if we show up and are curious and kind to others, the odds can turn in our favor. And once we make a friend or two, we can nourish those relationships with time and attention. So question number 1, why am I lonely in a crowd? Question number 2, why am I lonely when I'm with those I love? Well, you might assume that married people would be less lonely and therefore less susceptible to the health risk of loneliness. But it depends upon the marriage. The writer Chekhov cynically observed, if you're afraid of loneliness, don't get married. Well, how often have you watched a married couple at a restaurant go through the entire meal and never say a word to each other? We in the Western world seem to hold relationship as a cure for all ills. But the paradox of relationship is, the more we can embrace our own separateness and the more we can live with ourselves, the better our relationships will be. Jesus Christ said it this way, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. This is the most important commandment. We all know this, right? But then he says one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented statements in all of Scripture. But there is a second commandment. Love others as well as you love yourself. Love others as well as you love yourself. Well, no wonder we suck at loving others. We suck at loving ourselves. We interpret Scripture to mean we are to give others all of ourselves, everything we are, when maybe what it really means is, in order to love others, we first must love ourselves. Too often behind the exchange of sex or marriage vows lies the unconscious fantasy that the other person will solve the problem of loneliness. But perhaps the greatest gift I can give those I love is the gift of knowing myself. So question number 1, why do I feel lonely in a crowd? Question number 2, why am I lonely when I'm with those I love? Question number 3, why am I lonely when I'm with myself? Why do we run from ourselves throughout life? Why do we occupy ourselves with doing instead of being? One of the most frightening moments in life is when you are finally alone with yourself and the numbing realization dawns that you have no idea who you are. It's good and yes, American to have a mate, education, a religion, children, possessions, and good health, if we can. But we must not attach ourselves so strongly to all those things that our inner happiness depends on them. We must reserve time to freely establish who we are. There is a big difference between being alone and feeling lonely. We need to set aside time alone to ask ourselves intimate and personal questions, to ask ourselves why we act the way we do, why we react the way we do, to examine our deepest motives, to question what we were put on earth to do, to question everything. So then when the time comes to lose our mate, our children, our possessions, our career, and we are left only with ourselves, it will be nothing new to us. By loving ourselves, the anxiety of false guilt and shame is conquered. And by embracing ourselves, we have the ability to embrace others, and they in turn to embrace us. A vicious cycle becomes the circle of life.